A billionaire marries a woman he's never seen. When he lifts her veil, he freezes in shock. The billionaire's hands shake as he reaches for his bride's veil, surrounded by 300 wedding guests who have no idea they're witnessing the most elaborate revenge plot in corporate history. Alexander Cross has built his empire on ruthless deals and calculated risks, but nothing prepared him for this moment. When he lifts the delicate lace and sees her face, his blood runs cold. The woman staring back at him is Rebecca Monroe, the single mother he destroyed 5 years ago when he bought her family's company and fired everyone, including her dying father. Alexander Cross owns half of Manhattan and controls more wealth than most small countries. At 35, he's known for hostile takeovers, aggressive business tactics, and a complete lack of sentimentality. The rich man's reputation for crushing competitors has made him billions, but it's also made him countless enemies. The marriage arrangement came through his grandfather's will, a document that threatens to strip Alexander of his inheritance unless he marries within 6 months. The old man's final act of control from beyond the grave specifies that the bride must be morally worthy and approved by the family trust. Alexander sees it as his grandfather's last attempt to force him into respectability. The candidate is perfect, his lawyer, James Morrison, explains during their meeting. 28 years old, college-educated, no criminal record, no scandal. She's agreed to financial terms. And she understands this is purely business? Alexander asks, reviewing the contract. Completely. 1 year of marriage, then a quiet divorce. She gets $2 million. You keep your inheritance. Everyone wins. Alexander doesn't ask why a woman would agree to marry a stranger for money. He assumes she's desperate, and desperate people are easy to control. The CEO has built his fortune on that principle. What Alexander doesn't know is that Rebecca Monroe spent 2 years planning this moment. She researched his family, studied his grandfather's will, and positioned herself perfectly to be selected as his bride. The poor woman who once begged him for her father's job now holds the key to his entire fortune. Rebecca remembers every detail of their first meeting 5 years ago. She'd stood in Alexander's office, 7 months pregnant and desperate, pleading for her father's job at Monroe Manufacturing. The family company had been struggling, and Alexander's corporation had bought them out. "Please, Mr. Cross," she'd said, her hands resting on her growing belly. "My father has 30 years of experience. He knows every machine, every process. You need people like him." Alexander had looked at her with cold indifference. "We're streamlining operations. Your father's position is redundant. He's 62 years old with a heart condition. This job is his life. Then he should have worked harder to make the company profitable." Rebecca had left that office with nothing but rage and determination. 3 months later, her father died of a heart attack, alone in their empty house, while she was at the hospital giving birth to her daughter. Alexander Cross had never even learned his name. Now, Rebecca stands in the bridal suite of Manhattan's most exclusive hotel, adjusting her veil and preparing for the performance of her life. The wedding dress cost more than she used to make in a year, paid for by Alexander's accounts. The irony isn't lost on her. "You look beautiful," says Margaret, the wedding planner Alexander hired to manage every detail. "Mr. Cross is very fortunate." Rebecca smiles, but her eyes are cold. "I'm sure we'll be very happy together." The ceremony takes place in the hotel's grand ballroom, filled with New York's elite. Alexander's business associates, politicians, and society figures fill the seats, all eager to witness the billionaire's surprise wedding. None of them know the bride's identity. Alexander waits at the altar, checking his watch. This is just another transaction, another deal to be completed efficiently. He's already planning how to minimize his public appearances with his new wife over the next year. The music begins, and Rebecca walks down the aisle. Her veil is long and elaborate, completely obscuring her face. Alexander can see she's slender, moves gracefully, but nothing more. The prenuptial agreement ensures she can't touch his real assets, and the divorce papers are already prepared. "Dearly beloved," the minister begins, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander Cross and Rebecca Monroe." At the mention of her last name, Alexander's attention sharpens. "Monroe." The name is familiar, but he can't place it. He processes thousands of business deals. Surnames blur together after a while. The ceremony proceeds without incident. Rebecca's voice is steady as she recites her vows, but Alexander notices her hands tremble slightly. He assumes it's wedding nerves, not knowing they're shaking with barely contained fury. "You may now kiss the bride," the minister announces. This is the moment Rebecca has been waiting for. Alexander reaches for her veil, and she doesn't resist. She wants him to see her face, wants to watch his world crumble in front of 300 witnesses. The veil lifts, and Alexander freezes. The recognition hits Alexander like a physical blow. Rebecca Monroe, the pregnant woman who begged him for her father's job. The single mother he dismissed without a second thought. She's standing at the altar, legally his wife, with a smile that promises nothing but trouble. "Hello, Alexander," she says quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the first few rows of guests. Alexander's mind races. This isn't coincidence. This is calculated revenge, and he's walked directly into her trap. The prenuptial agreement, the inheritance clause, the year-long marriage requirement. She's maneuvered him into a position where he can't escape without losing everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, his voice barely steady, "I'd like to introduce my wife, Rebecca Cross." The crowd applauds, but Alexander can barely hear them over the sound of his own heartbeat. He's been outsmarted by a woman he barely remembered, and the realization is devastating. The reception begins immediately, with photographers capturing every moment. Alexander and Rebecca smile for the cameras, but their conversation is conducted in whispers and forced smiles. "How long have you been planning this?" Alexander asks during their first dance. 2 years, Rebecca replies, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Ever since I realized your grandfather's what was public record." "What do you want?" "Justice. Accountability. Everything you've never had to face." Alexander spins her gracefully, maintaining the facade for their guests. "If this is about your father's job." His name was Robert Monroe. He worked for Monroe Manufacturing for 30 years. You fired him 6 months before his retirement, and he died of a heart attack 3 months later. The words hit Alexander harder than he expected. He remembers the company now, the acquisition that barely registered in his memory, one of dozens of businesses he'd bought and stripped for parts. "I didn't know he died," Alexander says, and for the first time, there's genuine emotion in his voice. "You didn't care enough to know. Just like you didn't care enough to learn that Monroe Manufacturing was a family business started by his father. Just like you didn't care that 50 families lost their jobs because of your streamlining." The dance ends, and they separate. Alexander escapes to the bar, needing alcohol to process what's happening. His best man, David Richardson, joins him immediately. "Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Alexander mutters. "I've married one." David follows Alexander's gaze to where Rebecca stands, accepting congratulations from wedding guests. She's poised, elegant, playing the role of the happy bride perfectly. "She's beautiful," David says. "How did you meet her?" "It's complicated. All the best marriages are." Alexander wants to tell David the truth, but he can't. Admitting that he's been manipulated would destroy his reputation and probably his business relationships. In his world, being outsmarted is almost as bad as being poor. Rebecca approaches them, her wedding dress rustling with each step. "Darling, your aunt wants to meet me." The endearment is delivered with perfect sweetness, but Alexander hears the mockery underneath. She's enjoying this, savoring every moment of his discomfort. "Of course," Alexander says, offering his arm. "David, excuse us." As they walk away, David watches them with interest. Something is definitely wrong, but he can't put his finger on what. Rebecca charms Alexander's relatives effortlessly, answering questions about their courtship with carefully prepared stories. She's done her homework, and every detail is plausible. Alexander finds himself admiring her performance, even as he hates her for it. "How did you get selected for the marriage arrangement?" Alexander asks when they have a moment alone. "Your grandfather's trust required candidates to submit detailed applications. I highlighted my business education, my single mother status, and my strong moral character." And they believed you. Rebecca's smile is sharp. I told them I was a poor woman trying to provide for my daughter. They found that very touching. Alexander realizes she's been playing a long game, positioning herself perfectly to be seen as the ideal candidate. The trust managers would have loved her story, the struggling single mother getting a fairy tale ending. "Where's your daughter now?" he asks. "With my sister. She thinks mommy is on a business trip." "You're using a child as part of your revenge plot." Rebecca's facade cracks for the first time. "I'm securing her future. Do you know what it's like to work 3 jobs and still not have enough for groceries? To explain to a 4-year-old why you can't afford the medicine she needs." So this is about money after all. This is about consequences. You've spent your entire career destroying people's lives for profit. It's time someone destroyed yours. The conversation is interrupted by the photographer, who wants more pictures of the happy couple. Alexander and Rebecca smile and pose, but the tension between them is palpable. As the evening progresses, Alexander realizes the full scope of his problem. The prenuptial agreement protects his assets, but it also locks him into the marriage for a full year. Any attempt to divorce earlier would trigger the inheritance clause, costing him billions. Rebecca, meanwhile, is enjoying herself more than she expected. Seeing Alexander squirm is satisfying, but she's also discovering that playing the role of a billionaire's wife has its own rewards. The respect, the attention, the power, it's intoxicating. During the cake cutting, Alexander leans close to her ear. "You've made your point. What's it going to take to end this?" "The same thing it took to start it," Rebecca whispers back. "Patience." The honeymoon suite is a masterpiece of luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Alexander and Rebecca stand on opposite sides of the room, the pretense of marital bliss finally dropped. "The couch is fine for me," Alexander says, loosening his tie. "We can maintain separate bedrooms once we get to the house." "How generous of you," Rebecca replies, beginning to remove her jewelry. "Just like you were generous to my father." Alexander throws his tie on the floor. "I've acquired hundreds of companies. I can't remember every employee who got laid off." His name was Robert Monroe. He was 62 years old. He had a heart condition and 6 months until retirement. You fired him anyway. It was business, not personal. Rebecca whirls around, her careful composure finally cracking. "It was personal to me. It was personal to my daughter, who will never meet her grandfather because of you." The raw emotion in her voice stops Alexander cold. He spent years insulating himself from the human cost of his decisions, but Rebecca is forcing him to confront it. "I'm sorry about your father," he says quietly, "but this won't bring him back." "No, but it will teach you that actions have consequences, something you've apparently never learned." Alexander moves to the window, looking out at the city he's conquered. "So what's the plan? Make me miserable for a year, then disappear with your divorce settlement?" "The plan is to make you understand what it feels like to be powerless, to have your life controlled by someone else's decisions." "I'm not powerless. I'm a billionaire." Rebecca laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Are you? You can't divorce me without losing your inheritance. You can't expose me without admitting you've been manipulated. You can't even sleep in your own bed without my permission." Alexander realizes she's right. For the first time in his adult life, he's not in control. The feeling is terrifying and humiliating. "What do you want from me?" he asks. "I want you to remember my father's name. I want you to understand that Monroe Manufacturing wasn't just a line item in your portfolio. It was a family business that employed real people with real lives." "And then what?" "Then maybe you'll think twice before destroying the next company. Maybe you'll remember that behind every acquisition are families who depend on those jobs." Alexander turns from the window. "You're naive if you think 1 year of marriage is going to change how I do business." "Maybe, but I'm betting it will change how you sleep at night." The comment hits closer to home than Rebecca knows. Alexander has been taking sleeping pills for years, unable to quiet the constant mental calculations that drive his success. He's built his fortune on the ability to see businesses as numbers rather than people, but Rebecca is forcing him to see the human cost. I want to see your daughter, Alexander says suddenly. Rebecca's eyes narrow. Why? Because she's part of this now. Like it or not, I'm legally her stepfather. You're not her father. You're barely her mother's husband. But I am her stepfather, and if we're going to be married for a year, she deserves to know who I am. Rebecca considers this. She's been so focused on her revenge that she hasn't fully considered how this affects Emma. The little girl thinks her mother is on a business trip, but eventually, she'll have to learn the truth. One meeting, Rebecca says finally, but if you hurt her, I won't hurt her. I'm not a monster, Rebecca. Aren't you? You destroyed her grandfather's life without a second thought. You fired 50 people because it was more profitable than keeping them employed. What would you call that? Alexander doesn't have an answer. In his world, those decisions are called good business. But faced with a personal cost, he's beginning to question whether there's a difference between good business and monstrous behavior. The next morning, they fly to Philadelphia, where Rebecca's sister lives. The private jet is another reminder of the wealth gap between them, but Rebecca tries to focus on seeing Emma. Emma's 4 years old, blonde like her mother, with bright blue eyes and an infectious smile. She runs to Rebecca the moment she sees her, and Alexander watches the reunion with unexpected emotion. Mommy, you're back. I'm back, sweetheart. I want you to meet someone very special. Emma looks at Alexander with curiosity rather than fear. Are you my mommy's friend? I'm your mommy's husband, Alexander says, kneeling to her level. That makes me your stepfather. Emma processes this information seriously. Do you love my mommy? The question catches both adults off guard. Alexander looks at Rebecca, who's watching the interaction with guarded hope. I'm learning to, Alexander says finally, and he's surprised to realize it might be true. 6 months into their marriage, Alexander and Rebecca have settled into an uneasy routine. They live in Alexander's penthouse, maintain separate bedrooms, and appear together at necessary social functions. To the outside world, they're a successful couple navigating the early stages of marriage. But privately, their relationship is evolving in ways neither expected. Alexander has begun asking questions about Monroe Manufacturing, wanting to understand the business he destroyed. Rebecca has started attending board meetings, learning about the empire she's legally part of. I've been thinking about your father's company, Alexander says one evening over dinner. It's become their ritual, eating together and discussing business. What about it? I want to understand what made it special, beyond the financial records. Rebecca sets down her fork. Why? Because I think I made a mistake. Not just with your father, but with the whole acquisition. This is the first time Alexander has admitted fault in any of his business decisions. Rebecca studies his face, looking for deception, but finding only genuine confusion. Monroe Manufacturing was started by my great-grandfather in 1952, she says slowly. It was a family business that employed people from the same families for generations. When you bought it, you didn't just fire employees, you destroyed a community. And you think that matters? I think it matters to the people who lost their jobs. I think it matters to the families who had to move away to find work. I think it matters to the town that lost its biggest employer. Alexander nods slowly. I want to fix it. You can't fix it. Those people are gone. That community is destroyed. You can't undo what you did. But I can do better going forward. Rebecca stares at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe there's a way to do business that doesn't require destroying everything in your path. Maybe there's a way to be profitable and responsible. And you think I can teach you that? I think you're the only person who's ever tried. This conversation marks a turning point in their relationship. Alexander begins involving Rebecca in his business decisions, seeking her perspective on acquisitions and layoffs. She's surprisingly insightful, combining her business education with a deep understanding of how corporate decisions affect real people. Rebecca, meanwhile, finds herself genuinely caring about Alexander's business success. She's seen the pressure he's under, the constant demands and difficult decisions. She begins to understand that his ruthless approach wasn't just greed. It was survival in a world that rewards only winners. I have something to show you, Alexander says one evening, leading her to his office. On his desk is a thick folder labeled Monroe Manufacturing Recovery Project. What is this? A proposal to rebuild the manufacturing plant. New technology, better working conditions, employment for 200 people. It won't bring back everyone who lost their jobs, but it's a start. Rebecca opens the folder, scanning the detailed plans and financial projections. This would cost you millions. I can afford it. But why? The original plant is gone. The workers have moved on. This is just expensive guilt. Alexander sits on the edge of his desk. Maybe, but I can't sleep at night knowing I destroyed something that took 3 generations to build. I can't look at Emma and know I'm responsible for her grandfather's death. You didn't kill him, Alexander. Didn't I? I fired a 62-year-old man with a heart condition 6 months before his retirement. I knew what that would do to him. Rebecca realizes that Alexander's guilt runs deeper than she imagined. He's been carrying the weight of his decisions for years, and her revenge has forced him to confront that burden. What do you want from me? She asks. I want you to help me run it. The new plant, the recovery project. I want you to be my partner, not just my wife. The offer is tempting, but Rebecca knows it's also dangerous. She started to care about Alexander, and caring about him wasn't part of her plan. I need to think about it. Of course. But Rebecca, I want you to know that this isn't about the inheritance anymore. It's not about the marriage contract or the prenuptial agreement. It's about doing something right. 2 weeks later, Rebecca gives him her answer. She agrees to help with the recovery project, but she has conditions. The new plant must employ former Monroe manufacturing workers when possible. The company must provide profit sharing for employees. And Alexander must personally apologize to the families who lost their jobs. All of them. Alexander asks. All of them. Starting with mine. Alexander nods, understanding that this is about more than business. It's about accountability, about facing the human cost of his success. The apology tour is brutal. Alexander meets with dozens of families, many of whom are still struggling years after losing their jobs. Some forgive him, others don't, but all of them appreciate that he's finally taking responsibility. The hardest conversation is with Rebecca's sister, who's been caring for Emma during the marriage. I lost my job too, Sarah says quietly. I was the office manager, 20 years with the company, and I was let go with 2 weeks' notice. I'm sorry, Alexander says. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. Why now? Why do you care about our pain now? Alexander looks at Emma, who's playing with toys in the corner. Because I understand what I took from you. Not just jobs, but security, community, hope. Sarah nods slowly. Maybe that's enough. Maybe understanding is the first step toward forgiveness. On their first wedding anniversary, Alexander and Rebecca stand in the rebuilt Monroe manufacturing plant. The facility is modern and efficient, but it maintains the community feel that made the original special. 200 people are employed, many of them former workers who've returned to their hometown. Do you think your father would be proud? Alexander asks. Rebecca considers the question. I think he'd be surprised. He always said people could change if they wanted it badly enough. And do you think I've changed? I think you're trying to. That's more than I expected a year ago. Alexander pulls out a folder. Divorce papers, already signed. The year is up. You're free to go. Rebecca takes the papers, but doesn't open them. What if I don't want to go? Then we figure out what comes next. Together. Rebecca looks around the plant, seeing the workers who have their jobs back, the families who have returned to their community. This wasn't the revenge she planned, but it's something better, redemption. I have one more condition, she says. Name it. Emma needs a father figure. Someone stable, someone who understands that family is more important than profit. Alexander nods. I'd like that too. Rebecca tears up the divorce papers. Then let's see if we can make this marriage real. They're interrupted by Emma running up to them, excited to show them the toy airplane she's been building. Alexander kneels down to her level, genuinely interested in her creation. Will you teach me to fly it? He asks. Only if you promise not to crash it, Emma says seriously. Alexander laughs. I promise to be very careful. Rebecca watches them together, realizing that her plan for revenge has become something she never expected, a chance for all of them to heal. The billionaire who destroyed her father's life has become the man who's rebuilding it, and the poor woman who sought revenge has found something more valuable than money: love, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. But as they leave the plant that evening, Rebecca notices a letter on Alexander's desk from his lawyer. Inside is a report about another struggling company, another acquisition opportunity. The old Alexander would have signed the papers without hesitation. The new Alexander hands a file to Rebecca. What do you think? Rebecca realizes that their marriage has become more than either of them planned. It's become a partnership, a chance to build something better than what they destroyed. But she also knows that change is fragile, and the temptation to return to old habits is always there. I think, she says slowly, that we have a lot of work to do. Alexander nods, understanding that redemption isn't a destination, it's a daily choice. And for the first time in his life, he's choosing to build rather than destroy. The story ends with Emma between them, holding both their hands as they walk toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The billionaire has learned that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. And the woman who sought revenge has discovered that love can be stronger than hatred. But the real test is still ahead of them, whether they can maintain their new path when the next difficult decision arrives.